Hello and welcome to Conversations. Let's try that again. Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Brian Martinez from Honey Badger Radio. We hooked up after I put out on the internet that I wasn't necessarily concerned with covering men's rights issues, and I got some pushback from that because if I was going to do a series on gender, I might as well cover both genders. And I'd been reticent to do that. And Brian reached out and put me in contact with a number of members of the Honey Badger Radio crew. They are all very decidedly into men's issues and delineating the tensions between men's and women's rights or the problems that they face. So in this interview, we get into the patriarchy in a positive sense and feminism in a negative sense and try to find some middle ground between men and women for them to get together and get it done, being, life, society, and so on. Also, a note to the viewer, this was originally aired on the Badger Live Streams channel on Monday, April 12th, 2021, and there might be some video weirdness as I was trying to adapt to the live stream format, which is a little bit different than a recorded interview, but not that much different. Also, he was kind of interviewing me and I was kind of interviewing him, so it's a little different than my normal content. That being said, here is Brian Martinez from Honey Badger Radio.
So, what do you want to ask me?
Can I just say one thing to the audience?
Of course.
Every once in a while, people think that I'm looking at my phone, but I'm using this ancient technology called paper and pen to take notes. I'm not looking at my phone, just in case anybody's wondering and thinking
he's
I'm
not
rude.
being rude. He's not being
Especially,
rude, guys.
Yeah. You said in the introduction that these issues are connected to these issues. It seemed that you were saying that the way that we have our society in general, I'm gonna lay this out and please correct me to the degree that I'm off, that the way that our society has been treating or conceiving of men and boys is somehow related to the societal issues that we're facing. I think we should kind of try to define what we're talking about with regards to societal issues that we're talking about. There's the word called wokeness that I'm trying not to use anymore, but that's the one that most people recognize. Then there's a bunch of technical terms like critical social justice, critical theory, postmodernism. There's all these terms. So
cultural Marxism, et cetera,
cultural Marxism. Do you have a favored kind of term so we can start to identify this and then kind of see how that's related to men's issues and boys' treatment?
I think that maybe, and that's a really good question, but I think that maybe I bounce back and forth. Sometimes I say progressivism. Sometimes I say, fourth wave feminism or whatever wave we're on right now. I do think that it mostly emerges from that, but maybe the thing that I've been drawn to lately is social constructivism, because that's the term I've been using lately because it operates from let me just try and lay this out. So social constructivism or progressive social constructivism is this idea that all human beings are the same, not just should be treated the same. These are all sort of values that we already hold in general, that people should be treated the same, we should be fair to each other, etc. But I think that social progressive constructivism operates under the idea that we are the same, and if there are any differences between people, it is due to either discrimination or power differentials. And
so a very blank slate.
Yeah, exactly. There's this
Okay.
blank slate conception of the human being, and so because of that, these things have to be corrected. And one of the many ways of doing that, I think it's usually the first way that the progressives try to change things, is they try to sort of socially engineer people to not to not oppress one another by not being by essentially, abstaining from being exceptional. So this way you don't. It's like you're trying to protect the minority group by like making yourself smaller. So I think that. Okay, so I'm sorry that it wasn't. I use that terminology because I think that that's where a lot of it emerges from. It's basically social constructivism, or that's basically how I see it. It's like engineering people's behavior. You start with education. You can use shaming, abuse. These are all different ways of accomplishing that.
So to try to recapitulate that, or to encapsulate that, there is a conception of individuals as all the same, as equal, not just under the law, but equal in their essence, equal in their abilities, equal in their wit, humor, intelligence, merit, work ethic, etc. All that stuff is basically the same to begin with, and every difference is the outgrowth of some sort of cultural shaping. And once you conceive of that influence of culture completely dominating the individual, then almost ethically, you are compelled to establish a cultural order that is that includes a bunch of different tactics in order to enforce itself, that causes equal outcomes, that causes that blank slate to be continued and to be printed, almost like a Ford Motor Company taking all these materials that are all the same and then turning them into the same car over and over and over again. And every disparity of outcome is seen as is blamed on some sort of oppressive structure or imperfection in that cultural system.
Yes, because it would be harmful to those people who are, I guess, who exist in the realm of the exception. So I think this goes to how does this relate to men and women, and the way that it relates to men and women. I saw an interview you did with a woman. I apologize, I forgot her name, but she was a conservative woman that was speaking about how there seemed to be a celebration of the masculine in women, like an encouragement for women to be, boss ladies and to have like these, to demonstrate masculinity, and masculine traits like aggression and, even like the sort of sex drive and stuff. And that, but masculinity in men is considered to be toxic, right? I think that is an example of what's happening. So there is in the genders, there is a desire to make men more feminine and women more masculine so that they are more the same. So it's sort of being encouraged. You can find no shortage of articles that suggest that, men should kiss each other, hold hands, engage in behavior that I guess for whatever reason, the writers of the article consider to be feminine. And even though these things are, I don't even like using the terms feminine and masculine to describe these behaviors because I don't think that they're entirely accurate. I think it's a little bit like it's usually the way that conservatives discuss masculine and feminine. Okay,
so you get a pinch of the gender critical going on then.
Yeah, there is. I do a little bit, but only because I think that we have historically attributed traits that are masculine with things that are a bit like negative unless they are properly channeled, i.e., unless they have the appropriate utility. And I think one of the main problems that men face in like the larger umbrella of what we consider men's issues is that they are treated as utilities. So men are a resource, right? That's how the world uses them. It doesn't matter whether you're on the whether you're a feminist or you're a traditionalist conservative. They treat men as a resource. They just use them in different ways. Feminists use shaming tactics. So they, say that men are they're inherently bad. There's something inherently wrong with them. But men, you can, you can cleanse yourself of sin if you serve us. If you basically become a utility for the feminist movement. movement, an ally. If you prop women up, if you give them jobs, if you give them your resources, if you donate to our causes, etc., you can, be forgiven for your sin of being born a man. On the other side, though, from the conservatives' end, they still see men as a resource, but there is a desire or at least an instinct to honor them if they do so appropriately. For example, they'll have men die in wars. They'll allow them to serve, be of service to their civilization as, people who do the toughest jobs, people who are firefighters, they are our first responders, etc. And so there's nothing wrong with still using men in that way. So it's not like there's a big difference, except that while feminists use shame to sort of get men to serve them and be a utility for them, conservative types, I guess, is to put it, they offer them respect under the assumption that men earn it, if that makes sense.
It's whipping a carrot kind of thing.
Yeah. But there's still a desire.
The jackass and the between those two. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I want to push back gently that one criticism that I've heard from feminism about how society treats females is that they are a resource. They're a sexual resource. They are a resource for fecundity, for more human beings, that men treat women as a resource for emotional labor or emotional capacities, for the maintaining of a domestic livelihood and for the rearing of children. So there is, largely speaking, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing that we do treat each other as resources. So what's inherently negative or impactful in a negative way to be treated as a resource? Because we do always treat each other as resources. Yeah,
so I'm glad that you brought that up. So I don't necessarily believe that it is a bad thing that we do that. The reason why I mentioned it is because I think that the ways in which men are impacted, and I got to speak in, I don't like to speak in collectivist terms, but there's really no other way to do it. But the way in which men are impacted by our, the way that we sort of set up our society and civilization, it does necessitate them to be a resource. And on top of that, men generally don't mind that. It's like they kind of know, if a man joins the military, he understands what he's putting at risk and he knows why. So I'm not really making a moral judgment against the left or the right. I'm merely trying to, and this is all that we do on the show, is we try to show people the blind spot that they may have when it comes to how men are impacted. Unfortunately, that's what gets us in trouble with feminists all the time, because their job, it basically depends on them showing the ways in which women are affected by things. And a lot of times they leave men out of the equation. I would say most of the time, until very recently. But that's when the toxic masculinity conversation rose up, when it basically got to a point where men could not be ignored anymore in terms of the ways in which they suffer. Men are the majority of suicides. They are the majority of homeless. They are the people who are at the bottom of the, like they say, the feminists talk about the glass ceiling, where their CEOs are mostly men and all that. But men are also below what we call the glass cellar, where there's an overwhelming number of men that are living below the poverty line, that have below average jobs, they have low pay, they have lower IQ, etc. And so they're left out. And what we try to do is we try to show people that, here's a blind spot. But I agree with you. I think to some degree, our life is composed of us making sacrifices, sacrifices for, and they could be of our time, of our health. A lot of times we're always weighing things, one way or the other. So when a man starts a family and decides that he's going to work really long hours so that he can get that promotion, or so that he can get that raise, in the hopes that it will allow him to better take care of his family and send his kids to college, etc. He makes the sacrifice of not being around his children as much because he loves them and he wants to, give them the best life. And when activists see that, all they see is the man makes more money. And that's how it's sort of simplified, right? So they leave out all of these other factors. And I believe that if you don't have all of the variables, you cannot solve an equation. So, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, I think that on a broader scale, and I've been in conversations where I've tried to explore an issue and then accused of being imbalanced because I'm only my bias shows up in the length of the amount of time that I spend exploring these things. But I try to be balanced because I'm balancing a greater conversation. So if you take me and you include me in other content creators, then I hope that there's a balance there, right? I see that's kind of what you're saying, that you guys are focusing on men's issues. You get some flack for that because a certain probably contingent of activist feminists see you as a threat. But if you can win over women, just kind of leave the activists out of the equation and just win over women to giving them access to the information that you're providing, then that kind of pushback kind of evens out, or you can kind of discount it insofar as they aren't gunning for you guys and trying to cancel you or negatively impact you. That's kind of crossing the line in my opinion.
Yeah, well, they've been trying to cancel us for like 7 years at least. So, and we've managed to either like survive all of their assaults, or we're too small to take notice. I think that it's a bit of both of those things.
Yeah. I was thinking today about a really stupid wordplay, but there's this gender is a social construct that kind of talks, that you've heard about, most of us have heard about in the chat, I'm sure everybody has. But I was thinking gender is a social contract. And by that I mean it's not necessarily prescriptive, but there are these relationships that we engage with, and they're fueled by, lust, romance, social pressure to get into a pair bond. And then you have the pressure of having a child that comes from that. And that there's kind of a social contract that is made by every given couple, every given individual. Hopefully it's fair within those two people, let's just say between men and women, which is the majority of relationships that give rise to human beings. There needs to be some sort of social contract between those. And the way that those two individuals kind of understand, or the way in which they make the bargain of their relationship so that they both are well served as best as able, depends on them both understanding each other. Men need to understand women, their tendencies, so they can kind of understand their partner in a general sense and then break that down in the, when you get up close and personal. And women are best served by understanding men's psychology, their drives, their desires, what makes them feel meaningful, and all those different things. So I think that there is a lot of room to just provide really good information. Statistically, you're talking about how men are being treated by the society, but also kind of generally kind of understand what it is to be a man and how men kind of shape up. And there's nothing inherently bad or threatening about focusing on men, especially for women to get insight into men and then to go forward and build better relationships that serve them largely.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that, Honey Badger Radio is mostly operated by women. So that's we do have a unique perspective. I just happen to be the guy that does all the tech stuff for them, or most of it, and I host the shows. So, but it's most of the people on it. It was started by women, and they are because they are women, it's actually gotten us a lot of attention, because a woman speaking out for men gets men's attention and women's attention, which is a little bit, it's kind of ironic, because we unintentionally use identity politics to talk about an identity that is normally not considered under the sort of progressive stack, which is men. But if a woman is saying it, it's almost like a demonstration of women's social power, which is something that we try to bring up. So even though we have a focus on discussing men's issues, we know that you can't discuss, first of all, you can't discuss men's issues in a vacuum, because whatever issues men face, women also face, whether they are mothers or wives or daughters that are dependent on their fathers, etc., or just women hoping to form relationships with men, to your point. And so we do end up almost always discussing the ways in which our blindness to the issues that men face, which are some are legal, some of them are social, or maybe most of them are sort of socio-cultural, how those can affect women as well, and why women should be paying attention. And then the ways in which the sort of current narrative, which is this is what we're up against, is the larger sort of mainstream narrative, which is a feminist narrative. So it doesn't really matter if you call yourself a feminist or whatever, but the sort of feminist framework is the mainstream narrative. That relationship between men and women, it comes from that. It goes all the way back, like a long, long ways. And so we have to kind of at least try to drill down into areas that the prominent narrative does not normally find comfortable. And that always upsets people, but that's only because it's sort of like, I guess it threatens their reality or their perception of reality.
Could you, and I apologize for any of your audience that is not wanting to hear this, but I would like to get kind of like your take on what is this basic feminist narrative, so we can kind of get a good grip on it from my audience.
So at the center of all feminism, like no matter what wave you're talking about, no matter how moderate it is, at the core of all feminism is an idea that I think is disputable, highly disputable. And that idea, it comes from the sort of feminist definition of patriarchy. So what is patriarchy? Do you know?
There's different versions of it. There's like this demiurgical Gnostic conception of it, that there's this evil god that's created a infinitely powerful oppressive structure that is kind of basically breaking down women and using men to exert itself. There's this, it's kind of like this religious kind of understanding of patriarchy. Then there's like a very materialistic form of patriarchy that would go back in time and point out that men had most discretionary power and ownership over resources. Let's just say, like, I'm just going to throw out like 1880s Victorian England or something like that. You can see that there's definitely some form of patriarchy going there. And I think that there's a bunch of different versions of that in between.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of versions, but like the sort of general narrative that comes out of it, no matter whether the root is, sort of Gnostic or if it's material, is that men throughout history have oppressed women or controlled their sexuality or otherwise, exerted a kind of overt power over them at the expense of women and to the benefit of men. Even if it's only a small percentage of men, I know that the current discourse around patriarchy suggests it's more like a class-based patriarchy, so the most powerful men. That's when they say patriarchy hurts men too, because it harms the poor men or the minority men, etc. But it still comes from the same base line of reasoning, which is men above women and to the benefit of men, to themselves, and at the expense of women. And when you have that as your central thesis, which is an unproven idea, because you would have to then assume that men did not love women until like the 1960s, when the second wave feminist movement liberated women, right? And I don't see enough evidence for that. And the fact that we can talk about what is the truth about patriarchy. So I think the truth about patriarchy is, one, the original definition of patriarchy is simply about legacy. So, patriarchy is a man marries a woman, they have children, the woman and the children take on the husband's name. And the purpose of that is a promise to the husband, essentially, right? Your legacy will go on from this point. We will be known as this, right? And I don't know that is particularly I don't think that's oppressive. I think that we're at a point now where people hyphenate their last names, and they kind of worked around that, and that's fine. That's really not a big deal. But the oppression narrative, I think, is actually quite damaging, because even if you want to, you can't really have a tremendous sympathy for men if you're operating from the framework that men are inherently an oppressive force, which is what patriarchy assumes. So,
or they're privileged, which is kind of an oppression
yes.
light.
Yeah, exactly. It is a light, like an oppression. Essentially, they have advantage. They are whatever they do is basically just them demonstrating their power. And of course, women are always, this harms women too, this idea of patriarchy, because it always puts them in this position of being on the back foot without acknowledging women's power. Now, I think the truth is something like, it's more like that social contract that you spoke about. I think that is probably with, and also doing so under the assumption that any and all exceptions to the rule are welcome, but in general, I think that men make a promise to protect and provide for women. Women expect that men do that. And in return, they give them sexual access, they give them children, and then they go from there. I think that if people are left to be free to do as they want, that's how most pair bonding relationships will probably end up. And I'm not a traditionalist. I'm not going to say that this is like a prescription that everyone should have, but I believe that people should be free to choose whatever relationship they want without these sort of harmful narratives that essentially create distrust and fear between men and women. And I think that is because that's what, first you scare women by telling them that men are all rapists and oppressors, which is what feminism says now. And there's no shortage of, TV shows or films or public service announcements that talk about rape culture, that talk about men drugging women and taking them home and all of this other stuff. And then as a response to that, women, because they are more prone to being risk averse, and they tend to, be affected by these kinds of narratives, you get the Me Too movement. And some of it is absolutely legitimate, but who knows how much of it is just born from that same fear that was already planted, with these scary narratives.
Well, I think that the narrative that you described is being construed as harmful. And one problem with a very small subset of people who get enraged by this discussion or who flip out about it is that they think that just describing how things are is saying how things should be. There's ways of describing general terms not being prescriptive. And that's another problem I have with gender. It's like gender is real, it's emergent, it's natural. It's not a set of stereotypes that you have to be this way. You can break down the exception, but we can still talk about basically the rule without it being necessarily oppressive. So with that caveat out of the way, some would say that the protect and provide narrative of men is itself harmful, because then women are treated as a resource that is only there to nourish and to nurture men and the consequences of men's little pokey things.
Yeah, sure. But is a man not working a full-time job and bringing home the bacon for his family, also not him treating himself as a resource, or her treating him like a resource?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of balances going on there that get obscured when that narrative itself is seen as harmful or is seen as oppressive, where women aren't allowed the freedom to interact with the professional world. And since those things have been broken down, those barriers have been broken down, a certain contingent of very powerful, well-funded feminists it seems like they're going to stop at nothing until they have gender parity at every level of society, which I think is wayward and itself kind of difficult, but maybe that's not harmful. Maybe it's time for equality to reign, right?
Well, I mean, I'm all for people freely choosing whatever they want to do with their life. So if a woman wanted to be the breadwinner and the man wanted to raise the kids, I don't have a problem with that arrangement at all. But we have to we have to talk about some difficult things here with regards to if we make those choices. For example, men aren't the only ones that are trying to win women by, gaining status and resources and a nice car and nice clothes, etc. The reason why men do those things is because they know that women are attracted to them. So there was a joke, I think, that Chris Rock used to say. He says, if I didn't need a nice house to attract a woman, I'd probably live in a cardboard box under the expressway. So. And it's not to say that men don't care at all about material things, but I think that it's a factor that plays in. And in addition, women desire certain things from men, and they also have expectations. And so I know that a lot of times these narratives that we find dangerous, this idea of the homemaker woman, is something that feminists rail against because they, for whatever reason, and I'm not trying to ascribe any malice to this idea, but I think that they find, for some reason, working a job in a career field or owning a business or something is somehow a better way of living your life than raising your children at home. And I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other, but I think that the problem that you run into is if you allow women to have their preferences, they will almost always want men that are provider protectors. So you can't just socially engineer men away from high paying jobs that require a lot of competition and all that, because they won't attract women. You'll have to also socially engineer women or try to convince them that dating lower status men that make less money or want to be stay-at-home dads is just as valuable. And that, I think there have been attempts to do that, and it never works because the feminist narrative not only tries to have its cake and eat it too in terms of, a woman should be able to do it all, have a job, a career, and kids, etc., but it also convinces women that they deserve the best quality men, right? Regardless of what they look like, regardless of whether or not they take care of themselves, how much weight they put on, etc. So you convince women everywhere that they are all deserving of the highest quality men available, whoever they're attracted to sexually, and that they should pursue those men. But simultaneously, you tell them that if they, that they shouldn't necessarily want to be stay-at-home mothers or be a married partner of their man at the same time, right? So you run into a problem where you have women that are looking for the top 5% of men, and they also are convinced that they want to, put off having children and be a career woman, etc. And then you end up with very unhappy women because there have been studies done that show that women are by and large less happy than men. So at the end of the day, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands this, I'm 100% on board with people choosing how they want to live their life, how they want to work out their own individual social contracts with their partners, regardless of whether they're heterosexual relationships or not. None of that matters. Just know what you're asking for is really what you want. Because if you are a woman that wants a man that's a stay-at-home husband and you're going to be the career woman, hopefully you won't lose interest later, because this happens. Women lose interest in their men. They don't find them sexually attractive because they're not, I guess, in that position that women typically do find attractive, which is that they tend to be the breadwinners, etc. But ultimately, but go ahead. I was just going to say, ultimately, it doesn't matter how people work it out as long as they know what the consequences of that are. But I am highly interested in families staying together, if at all possible, because that is a serious issue.
With a lot of fallout for men, women, and children. It seems like, I hope I'm not straw-manning a certain aspect of activist feminism, but it seems like the nature is that that women, is it not hypergamy or hypergamy?
Hypergamy is
they want to mate either equal but hopefully up. They never tend to go down.
They never go down.
Yeah.
I mean, like you'll find exceptions. Like there are,
Yeah.
for example, height is a big thing, right? Women want men that are taller than them. And it all comes down to women want to be with men that make them feel safe because women tend to value security. And a man that is, appears to be mature, appears to have earning potential when he's younger, or is earning, good enough when he's older. He doesn't have to be a billionaire, but, I don't think that women shoot that high. But they want to make sure that the man is going to bring security and stability to her environment, and he's gonna create a comfortable place for her to have and raise children that are going to be healthy. And so that's all that ultimately that's what most women want, what it boils down to. And men, of course, they want to meet that, whatever that standard is.
Yeah. So it seems like nature has engineered women to shoot even or up. Feminism is this activist narrative that makes you resentful of the anything above you in a way. Insofar as there's some kind of conflict theory or some kind of
the guy above
sort
you
of
isn't
Marxism or
actually oppressing you.
Yeah, the guy above you. So nature wants you to want that person, but the ideology, some form of it that I've seen, makes you resentful of everybody, makes you resentful of the people that are above you in a way. So it really clashes with that equity-based or equality of outcomes-based social engineering project that has to either suppress or ignore biology and nature in order to provide happiness at the end of this great march.
Right. So that's why it needs instead the only thing that what feminists would have to do is essentially take those men that are at that higher level and tear them down. But of course, tear them down to women's levels so that at least if they're going to have to pair bond with men, at least those men are at the same, level. But the problem with that is that those women are less inclined to be attracted to that man now. And so it is. It
just seems
damaging.
like a recipe for disaster. Good thing that wasn't implemented at all in our culture.
No. But and it is actually, you make a good point. It is actually a problem that we're dealing with now because, there's always this talk about the wage gap. But the truth is, women who are out of college, like just, fresh out of college age women, on average make more money than men. And that it is around those years that women are also at their most sort of fertile, for baby making. And again, I'm not saying this is not a prescription that women have to do this, but this is one of the main problems we're running into that I think is a consequence of feminism, which is we are not asking anything of women. As a culture, we basically try to do everything we can to not judge them, to not criticize them, or if people do, it's considered misogyny, and what instead we should be doing is asking ourselves, if we're going to try to build a healthy society, we have to not only discuss the ways in which people should be liberated, or at least we could be a little bit more flexible with what is considered gender roles for men and women, but we also have to be honest about how that will change the perceptions between men and women and what responsibilities come with those. I don't like to say rights because I think rights are very specific, but with the kind of more liberal view on the way in which we view men and women has to come with responsibilities as well. So we can either try to be more compassionate to men and women. I think that men need it right now, or we can also demand more respect from them. And I think that in some ways, that's where our big problem is. We have less love for men and less respect for women, if that makes sense.
What does compassion for men look like? What do you think that men need compassion for that would be valuable for them? And we're not talking about pity or handouts.
No.
else?
That's what I'm talking about. Like when I said we have to be careful that we have to remember that it would probably be better if we offered opportunities for both men and women to earn our respect as opposed to just compassion. But I think that we'll go all the way back to before when a child is first born. When a boy is born, the first thing that happens is we circumcise him, and that immediately does harm, right? And circumcision is still really normal in the United States. I don't know if it's like as common as not, but I know that I was very lucky that my parents didn't believe in it for whatever reason. But circumcision is very common, and it is a really traumatic experience for infants. I have a study here that shows that newborn baby boys, when they're circumcised, a part of them remembers that trauma. So we immediately do harm when they're born. And we wouldn't do that to girls, by the way. And I know that some people might say that female genital mutilation is different only because the organ is different. But the trauma, it doesn't really matter which one hurts more. I mean, can we just not do that to boys? Like, I'm just, okay. And it's also a violation. Like it should be illegal, but we do it. So circumcision, that's the first act of cruelty, and we do it to baby boys right when they're born. And then I think that if you look at the way in which we treat boys in the education system, we don't accommodate for their particular needs of learning. Boys are not like girls. If we accept that boys and girls are different, with very few exceptions, then we also would want to take into consideration boys' unique needs with the kind of like their reading levels are way lower than girls. They're far more likely to be diagnosed with like ADHD and autism and things like this and be medicated for it. We basically have an education system that has shifted from what I would think was more gender neutral to a lot more feminine oriented. So, the kind of books that boys and girls read are far more directed towards girls' tastes and interests. And so their reading levels are much higher. A lot of schools don't have recess anymore. So boys don't have a way to sort of get all that energy out of them, and that's why they act restless in class, and then we diagnose them with this or that problem. And plus, most of academia, I think it's something like 85% of it, is very sort of feminist oriented. So it operates from a lot of these central frameworks, like these ideas like patriarchy and privilege, male privilege and toxic masculinity. And it's all coming into academia. Oh, and then I forgot something really important. A lot more boys are growing up without fathers. And of course, the fatherlessness issue is it's a direct product of the sort of like sexual liberation movement of the 60s. And the feminists were essentially pushing men out of the home. They were offering women a substitute. So they allowed women, single moms, for example, to marry the government, get rid of their fathers. They were even encouraged to do it. The Black community, for example, was essentially offered a Faustian deal that if there is no man in the home, they can get this much money from the state. So you have this single motherhood issue. And when a child grows up in a single parent home, it doesn't matter if it's a single mother or father, but most of the time it's a single mother, like way, way, way more. Those children are far more likely to be abused. They're far more likely to be molested, either by family members or step parents or, visitors or what have you, strangers. The mother can't do the job of both parents. So this puts the child in danger. The teenage girls are more likely to hit puberty earlier and become sexually active earlier and become mothers themselves earlier. Teenage boys, they're more likely to join gangs and get involved with crime and drug abuse and alcoholism and suicide, or just a slow kind of self-destruction, which I think a lot of people don't see for example, someone who has drug addictions or alcohol addictions, they don't see that as suicide, but that is what it is in a lot of ways. It's just like a self-destruction it's like a slow motion suicide over several years. George Floyd is an example of that. Nobody wants to talk about that, but George Floyd he had no father in the home. He got involved with criminality quite early. He, has children from different moms. He didn't marry any of them. He was addicted to lots of drugs and alcohol and marijuana, etc. And he is a product of this very thing. And yet the only conversation happening around George Floyd is one of racism, which doesn't solve any of these issues. Like, it's like the wrong, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a bad diagnosis. Like, the story of George Floyd did not start when he was on the ground with the cop on his neck. It started years and years and years before, and no one wants to talk about that. So, and I have compassion for that. I mean, I grew up in Chicago in a very, very tough part of the city. And I've seen a lot of people from my generation join gangs, get addicted to drugs, become, I've seen girls. I couldn't tell you. I would say 100% of the girls in the neighborhood, and I know this is anecdotal, so this is not a statistic, but all of the girls that grew up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, which was like the roughest part of the west side of Chicago, they all ended up pregnant before they were 14 years old. And their lives were over. They lived in Section 8 housing. They collected welfare checks. They would have multiple children because they were going to get greater tax benefits. They would have children for the tax benefits and the welfare benefits. And of course, those children were more likely to be abused by her and any man that she brings home. It's a vicious cycle. So the fatherlessness thing is a big one. And I think that it does come from a lack of compassion. To answer your question from before, we need compassion from boys from the moment they're born. We need compassion for their specific educational needs, which we don't have. And we need to have compassion for fathers for what they bring. Do you remember there was an episode of, I don't know if it was The View or The Talk, but Terry Crews was on. It was a few years ago, and it was around Father's Day. Have you noticed that every Father's Day becomes about single moms and mothers? If you look, there is hardly any Father's Day sort of messaging that comes out that's in support of dads. Most of it essentially takes single mothers and treats them like dads. So it's more that feminist thing that, there's no difference between men and women. That means there's no difference between fathers and mothers. And Terry Crews had to make a defense of fathers and why they're necessary on this show. And everyone attacked him for it. And I think it would seem to me that if we had a problem with mothers not being involved with their children, everyone would get on board that should change, because mothers bring necessary things to a child's development, and fathers do too. They just bring different things. But if you make that lopsided, it does, immeasurable damage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And as goes men, so goes women. The activist contingent of the transgender constituency uses Women's Day to talk about trans women. It uses just as feminism uses Men's Day to talk about women. So there's the progressive stack. It's just ramping up now.
That's
and
right.
You see a lot of the same rhetorical maneuvers that certain forms of feminism took are now being used by certain forms of trans rights activism to denigrate, disparage, and then deny women's own existence. So it's a vicious cycle. Pulling back from that, though, if it seems like we do need a patriarchy, at least on a narrative level, and by that I mean we need an image of the good father, the good grandfather, the good son, the good boy for people to aspire to and to expect from one another. Do you agree with that? And what would that be? What would be the good patriarch?
I do agree with that 100%.
The components of that?
I would warn against this only because for whatever reason the cathedral, the orthodoxy, does not like it when you want to help men realize their best self. Look at Jordan B. Peterson.
But come on, everybody loves Jordan. Come on.
No.
They throw him softballs every day in, day out, just softball after softball.
Jordan Peterson, and I think that what he says isn't particularly revolutionary or radical. It's quite common sense things. But men, what you're talking about, the good patriarch, right? This narrative idea of the good man, that is not a good ally. Okay, that is what's being sold. Be a good ally. This is where male feminists come from. And I will say this, male feminists only exist because they're trying to figure out the best way to serve women, which is what men have been doing since the beginning of time. Like that's all men want to do, is be good to women. This is why I reject this whole idea of the sort of feminist definition of patriarchy, because it just doesn't bear out. Like, no society could survive if we were actually oppressive to women in the ways that patriarchy conjecture presumes. So it wouldn't exist. So that means that we know men love women. And you know this because watch any trend that women experience where they say, I want this kind of man. Let's say that I remember years ago, before I got married, obviously, I was doing online dating profiles. I was looking at them. I was doing it for research purposes. I wasn't dating online, but
for research
purposes. Yes. No, but around this time, the film The Hangover had just come out. Okay. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, everyone loved Zach Galifianakis. I think it was his first feature film or something. And all of the women on these dating profiles wanted a man like Zach Galifianakis. And all of them were trying to become Zach Galifianakis. So there's like a saying, men move in the shadow of women's desire. And this is something that this is this kind of feminine power that we don't acknowledge. Mm-hmm. Whatever women want, men try to become. And so if we have a constitutional republic, and a democratic process for electing people and a Supreme Court and all of these things and a military, and we have birth control, and we have the cities built a certain way, this kind of food, that, how much of that is women saying, I would like that? I mean, and men saying, yes, I will get it for you. And I think that is how it always was. And this isn't me making a case that women are oppressors and men are oppressed, but that what women tend to value, and because they are the sort of limiting factor when it comes to reproduction, men will do whatever it takes to protect. And any men who don't, for example, the men who exist outside the perimeter, the criminals and the rapists, etc., no one likes them, right? They are not at all celebrated. We punish them severely. Rapists get treated really poorly in prison by other criminals. That's how low they think they are. So even criminals generally don't go that far. So I think that this is the kind of narrative thing I'm trying to break past. But to go to what you were saying. So
that goes to say, what you just said goes to say that no matter what we want the good man to be, we're going to have to pass it through women. Women ultimately get to decide.
Women ultimately get to decide, and that's just it. And so in order for, now what do we do if we think that women's tastes should, be sort of directed for what's best for our society? Because women decide based on what they need in that moment. Mm-hmm. So if you live in, and I'll go back to the hood for an example, we can look at two different kinds of women. A woman who lives in a very comfortable, maybe like a high class area where she went to a fine college, she's, had both of her parents, she probably has multiple siblings, and she went to a good school, and she's going to get a good job, versus a woman who lives in the ghetto west side of Chicago in Section 8 housing and doesn't know her father. And all of her brothers and sisters are of other fathers, and this is not uncommon. I'm not strawmanning that. That's a regular occurrence. What are those women going to select for? Because women are the gatekeepers of reproduction. They are the gatekeepers of sex. So the first woman is going to try and find a man that reflects her values and also has more earning potential, or maybe the same earning potential at least. So she'll find someone of the same sort of general economic background, that has good potential to raise more money. So she's going to select him for those values. If she happens to be religious, she'll probably try to find a guy that shares her religion because she cares about that as well. But a girl who lives in a low a low economic neighborhood that has a lot of crime, she's going to select a man for his ability to be violent to other men because she wants someone who's going to keep her safe. So her selection is going to be different, and we have to acknowledge that. And again, it doesn't seem unreasonable, because if you live in an area that may as well be war torn, with shootings every day, and people being killed or raped is a common occurrence, or at least it seems to be, and the police are not around because they've been told they can't, then women are going to select for men that are going to be able to do all of the things that they need, which is to survive, right? It changes their strategy completely. So that is something that we have to also take into consideration. But yes, to your point, what a good patriarch is what a woman selects. And what a woman selects depends on, the
conditions.
Yeah, her conditions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. But that being said, if you were able to make a, some sort of kind of manual for men on good behavior. Let's just say you want to make a value judgment. You think that this is probably the best value judgment that will do the best good for the most people. The most men can most likely achieve it, and the most women will probably find these traits most admirable or most desirable, let's say. And you were able to kind of, give it out, and then people promulgate it like you're a prophet of something, prophet of the patriarch. If you were able to model that, what would that man be? And with respect to, that's the ideal, but where do you think society could reshape its attitudes towards men in order to facilitate the realization of this ideal?
I think that men...
What makes a good man, and how do we make him?
Yes. So I think what makes a good man. This is a really tough question, but I've been exploring this. I've been reading a lot about manhood. I think that where men are happiest is in a place where their competence and their merit are honored, right? And I think that what men desire more than anything is I think liberty. That I think is something that men cherish. Okay, from the moment they're boys, they're testing their limits. They want to see where their bodies can take them. They want to find out if they can make that jump on their bicycle. That kind of thing. They want the freedom to do it. Now, of course, when they're little children, we give them that. A father does, but there are invisible barriers that the child doesn't know about, just so that he doesn't kill himself, and so that mom doesn't worry too much. So I think that we are always, and you might notice that this is actually a conversation that happens in the sort of political sphere as well, that there's always a discussion going on between the importance of liberty versus security. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not a mistake that there are two wings. There's liberty and security, and there are two sexes. There are men and women. And the reason for this is that we're always trying to figure out where the best position both of these ideals is, and it is something that happens between the feminine and the masculine. And when I say the feminine and the masculine, I'm not specifically talking about men and women, because men have a feminine and women have a masculine as well. And this is the thing that Peterson tries to talk about. He tries to encourage people to foster their masculinity. And he says this about women as well, because feminism, again, because men and women are connected, you can't harm one without hurting the other. feminism has harmed men, but it has also harmed women by conditioning them to essentially see themselves as having no agency and being victims. And that's ultimately what makes women unhappy, because if they know that they can affect the world and that their actions matter, and that the way in which they raise children, the way in which they select men, the way in which they, carry all these things out in their lives has a rippling effect on everyone around them. And then they take that into consideration. It brings a great deal of satisfaction to a person because it means what I do matters. And men are already aware of this. In fact, they're probably being given hyper agency, where it's like, even things you didn't do, you did, because you're a man and you're part of this larger collective. So what I think men want is to be useful. That's what a good man is. It's a man who is doing something. Most of the time, it's in cooperation with other men, because this is another misnomer that feminists put out, is that men are inherently competitive. There is a competitiveness, but in general, healthy competition exists to make men stronger so that they can operate as better parts of a cooperative group, right? So when men are working together, there is probably nothing that they can't accomplish. But a good man basically is a person who is useful in a constructive way to their society, to their family, to their wife, to their children, and to their community. And he is honored for that, because he's making a sacrifice. It's like
he's sacrificing his liberty. You're saying that he's compelled to be free, but he sacrifices that in order to be, I guess, real and stable and appreciated.
True, but there is freedom in discipline. And I know it seems like a contradiction.
No, that's very Orwellian, but go on.
No. I think that when you have discipline, you basically bring enough order in your life that you can then feel free to operate, because you can't. It's like if I just told a man, you can do whatever you want, and that's what freedom is, and that man decides, well, I'm just going to drink all of the alcohol in the world. He's free to do it, but is he going to be happy? He's probably not. He's, it's about. I think that for men, but maybe in general, discipline equals freedom. It's like they want to build. That's what men want to do. They want to build. And that requires discipline.
No.
And that's what makes them happy. And to see their children, take after them and be. It's just like, who do you want around you on your deathbed? I think that everybody should think about that. And why are they there?
So you think that men being useful is a good thing. So men being a resource, then, is actually something that gives them meaning.
I think that's what men want. This is why I don't try to suggest that men should not be resources. I know that, because that's what, okay, so this is how I think men's issues and feminism are very different. I think that feminism tries to make the argument that women should never, ever be treated as a resource, and that they are under the current system, but they should never be that way. They should be completely liberated to do whatever they want, and they should, and this is very important, they should be free of judgment. So no matter what they do, we're not allowed to judge them. We're not allowed to have an opinion on it at all, right?
Well, see, it again, once you, this is a little bit of a straw man, but it's apropos, I think, is that you end slut shaming, and the next thing to go is the kink shaming. So no longer can you regulate women's behavior, but eventually the Pandora's box is actually men's, because men have a variety of different, the distribution of men goes into the very virtuous and the very vice-laden. So once you start to disallow the pressures that regulate people's behavior, you kind of open the floodgates. It goes all the way down.
I would say that women are just as bad when it comes to their vices. I've known women way kinkier than me. So, but I'm
wait. Did you learn this from your research?
Adults. No, that was way before. I was much younger. But no, I don't. that's one of the things right there, though. We do tend to see degeneracy as a male area, and there are definitely men there, and maybe degeneracy is not the right word, but you were talking about these sort of like, these sexual appetites that we would consider to be fringe. Women absolutely.
Well, okay, I was just saying that once you start to disrupt, the so-called slut shaming is actually a part of an entire network of regulating humans' behavior through shame, I guess, through guilt, in order to provide the best societal result. So the shame might sting on a local level, but if you get rid of shame in society, you then eventually end up in a shameless society where a lot more corrupt things.
You get their foot in the door, right?
Yeah,
this is how you get maps, and I think
Google
that's
Maps
true.
or Apple Maps. Which do you prefer?
You don't know what Maps is? Okay, I don't want to go there, but that's how you get it. But the thing I was going to say is, that's true, and of course they're not aware that is where things go, but there is and this is the thing, there is a problem with not allowing judgment, because it's not only that you're just going to move the Overton window further and further out into the fringe, but it's also, I think that on some level, a kind of social judgment. It doesn't have to be legal. We don't have to put things into law. We don't have to get into blasphemy laws or anything like that. But if there is a kind of social control that says, maybe this kind of behavior is unhealthy and we shouldn't celebrate it. Doesn't mean that it can't exist. It doesn't mean that we need to ban it, but we should probably not be celebrating this. It may, at least on some level, it's probably a good thing that we have judgment, and because a lot of times it is for a person's well-being. To say maybe you shouldn't eat cupcakes every day and put on 300 pounds because you're going to get sick and you're going to get diabetes and you're going to have all these health problems. And maybe if you cover your body in tattoos from head to toe, and again, I'm not against these things in moderation. I just know that when these things get excessive, like anything can get excessive, it can become unhealthy. And I think that the first line of defense against unhealthy behavior is probably judgment. I can't think of anything that's...
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it starts with being shamed, but then everybody has a sense of shame that regulates themselves. It's called a conscience, and actually it's a very good thing. And though it's not pleasant to be embarrassed by your behavior, it will prevent you from doing that behavior in the future. And some behaviors we could say, well, we don't need to shame certain behaviors, and there will always be, again, it's a social contract where we figure out what's good and bad for society, and it has to happen in a dialogue. The problem with activism is that it always goes too far, and it speaks in absolutist terms, and then starts to, what, Chesterton's fence? It just starts demolishing the fence, because the fence is somehow a part of this normativity that we need to let go of, but we don't really understand why the fence is there. So we need to kind of wrap it right back around to social constructivism. There is an element of society, of culture, especially in a liberal society, and I mean that classically, where we do have input and we can barter with the mores of society. We can there's a push and a pull about what is regulated and what's unregulated in our society. So there is some form of social constructivism. There is some form of pressure that comes from culture that we do need to pay attention to, and then kind of engage ourselves in pushing back against it, because we do want to produce. We understand that culture does produce individuals to a certain degree. Not entirely. I'm not going for the complete blank slate. But when we talk about inspiring men and women to be the best that they can be and to be honest with what they want, that's a social constructivist project to a certain degree. At least it's a cultured product, because eventually you're going to want to make a movie or tell a story or embody it in some sort of cultural artifact, and in order to really communicate the richness of those values. So, I think that's all true. I believe that when it comes to
because I mean we do engage on some level in encouragement of behavior, like as a culture, right? We encourage behaviors and we discourage other behaviors, but I think when it's occurring naturally, it's usually from the bottom up. It's like individuals, families, extended family, communities, etc. They will encourage their own cultural values, and they want to see that in other people. But the sort of social constructivism, as I use it, that usually comes top down. That's basically
it's more astroturf than grassroots.
Yeah, exactly. It's coming from intellectuals and academic elitist types, and they're basically saying this is the best way to build society. And I know this because I'm the smartest and most educated person, and this is why you should do things as the way. But that's unnatural. Some people are going to try and force it, but it doesn't work that way. And I think that we can't, because another thing about social constructivism is, because it comes from the top down, it doesn't usually consider the evolutionary or biological factors in individual human beings, and their behaviors, their tastes, etc. Whereas the more bottom-up stuff usually springs naturally from those evolved traits, So I do think that there is a difference there, but I take your meaning. I mean, like we're not apes.
Well, that difference gets really fuzzy in the internet age, where you yourself could just be talking from the bottom up, but if you had the significant right platform, then you all of a sudden you're doing a top-down thing because your voice gets so big. So it's weird. It's really kind of hard to tell what's bottom up and what's top down, and you kind of have to throw your words and your ideas out there, and either they glom onto other people or not, which is different than what you were talking about with enforcement. It's not enforcement, it's resonance.
Right. Yeah. So I just put my ideas out there, and if they don't work, then people just won't attach themselves to them. And I'm sure that there have been ideas pitched all throughout human history that we have, by and large, tossed out because they just didn't resonate with us as human beings, because ultimately we are not rational, or at least not completely rational. People act on their emotions most of the time, and they usually just do what feels right. So, and that's okay, because again, at the end of the day, all I want is for people to be free and free to live the life that they want. So this is the reason why first off, I don't like the idea of liberating people from their gender roles. I think that's how not just feminists, but some men's rights activists, the ones that go back to the days of the feminist movement, they say, well, if we liberated women from their gender roles, we should also liberate men from their gender roles. But a lot of that always comes across as a little bit top down, because allowing people to live their life the way they want to isn't necessarily liberating them, because, as you know, by the Norwegian, I think it was in the Norwegian countries, of Nordic countries, where they have created supposedly the most gender equality, there has also been the widest gap in, choices for men and women in terms of their career choices and the economic differences and so on. So if we make people free, just don't be surprised if they end up falling into groups. That's, but I think that's important, letting people live their life the way they want. And in order for us to be free to live our lives the way that we want to, on some level, we have to look at the way in which the world is. It goes back to my old statement before. You cannot solve an equation if you don't have all of the variables. And so this is why I bring up, here are issues that men face that no one hears about. The reason, because nobody hears about it, we don't talk about solutions. And because we don't talk about solutions, then you always have like this massive blind spot in every culture all over the world, all the way back in history, that no one is discussing. And because of that, we only try to address that which we do see. And it always comes down to women. You talked about the progressive stack earlier, how women have taken over Father's Day and trans women have taken over, or Women's Day or Mother's Day or whatever. But the group of people that always gets left out of every single discussion around the progressive stack is men, in 100% of cases, because men are the common factor in patriarchy, and because of that, they can never be acknowledged. Think about Black Lives Matter. Okay, Black Lives Matter is an organization, not the sentiment. The organization Black Lives Matter uses the deaths of black men to redistribute money to black women, while claiming that black women are the ones that are in real danger. And it's not because they die more often, it's because they're women. And so on the progressive stack, even if black men are dying far more, which they are, and most of them being killed by other black men, but that's because it's a product of the fatherlessness problem that we talked about before.
Oh, I thought it was about whiteness and patriarchy.
Well, it is about patriarchy too. See, that's what I'm saying. So like, black men are the ones dying in crazy high numbers, and they're also being raised without fathers. They're being abused by their mothers. They're sexually abused very often. You can find countless stories of rappers that grew up in like the roughest parts of America who had been raped by their aunt or raped by a juvenile detention facility guard, who a lot of them are women. And there's a big problem with, guards, the female guards raping boys in these juvie facilities, right? No one talks about it. They come out damaged and broken, and then they get addicted to drugs and alcohol, and then we hear about them much later either dying in an altercation with a police officer, or like DMX, he just sort of went into a vegetative state and then died later, and everyone just thinks, oh man, drugs. And I was like, yeah, but he was abused by his mother, he was addicted to drugs because of like all of the depression and everything that he had to deal with, and maybe on some level somehow he also managed to pull out a really successful rap career while all that was happening. And when he dies, people are just like, yeah, drugs, man. And it's like, no. Do you see the common thread of abuse to boys that are growing up without fathers? This is the problem. Or at the very least, I'd like us to talk about it. So if there is another problem, if it is white supremacy, I can at least shake out all of the other factors, and then we can look at what's left over. That I don't assume to know everything, but I do know when there are things being left out.
Mm-hmm. What's this is one of those stupid interview questions, so get ready.
Okay.
What's an idea, an opinion, or a position that has changed working with Honey Badger Radio over the last 7 years? What's something that's kind of surprised you about being involved in this work that about how you look at things now as opposed to where you were when you first started?
Well, it's probably everything I've said here, but no, I think so before I got involved with HBR, I had a very good friend that went through a terrible, terrible divorce that no one saw coming. He met this girl, he fell in love. He was a romantic, right? He met this girl, he fell in love. They moved in together probably within 6 months, and then he started paying her way to medical school. I mean, she was going to medical school, but he didn't want her to be in debt because they were going to start a life together. And he married her and everything. And so he paid her way through medical school. And the day after she graduated, she left him and divorced him and took a bunch of half the money and all that. He had to sell his house. His life was ruined. And I could not figure out how someone could be so callous as to do that. And so I wanted to understand, and again, I don't think that she's typical of women, but what I wanted to understand what could make someone do that. And what I learned is, and I think that this is the real big thing that changed for me. Ironically, I got married after this, but what I learned is that it's not that women are evil or wicked or willing to do these things because it makes them happy or they have fun, but we have systems in place. We have institutions like divorce court, like child custody and alimony,
family law,
right? The family law system, which is built to benefit women. Like, men almost never benefit from these systems, and it's like putting a loaded gun in a room between two people, but only the woman can use it. And I think that that was probably the most eye-opening thing, because even in the cases because the divorce is something like 50% now, like, so half the time, I think that was the most eye-opening thing, because what it showed me was that we have a system that enables bad behavior. And so because of that, it encourages it. So it's not to say that it makes women like it does. It's not to say that women are bad and this like brings it out. It's
Well,
to
it's
say
an
that
incentive structure.
Yeah, we incentivize bad behavior, so we create bad behavior. And then I learned beyond that most other systems, such as the welfare state, are the same. They incentivize bad behavior. They incentivize single motherhood. And by extension, they incentivize the abuse of children, etc. And so, I think that was probably the most eye-opening thing.
There's an aspect. This might sound conspiratorial, but there's an aspect of a version of patriarchy founded on liberty, personal responsibility, and then being a resource that's then honored by the immediate people who are benefiting from your work. There's an aspect of that is a huge threat to the state systems that you've just described, especially welfare and getting people to be very dependent on the state. And I don't think that it was conspiratorial in the sense that there was this decided push for this, but I think that it dovetails the erosion of men's liberty and personal responsibility, and then the increase in the managerial elite, which is formed out of all these bureaucracies that require buy-in your entire life to be a part of the system. I think it just dovetails in a way. There's something very emasculating for me. And I really apologize if this is offensive, of the corporate structure and the state structure. There's something that I need to draw that back, because I think you can be a good man, a real man, and do really good work working for the government and working in these organizations. But it might be the case that certain social strata of it rely on men being devalued in order to influence society on a certain way with welfare.
Yeah, it does require us to treat men a certain way. And I think that in particular, government, it attracts a certain kind of person. So you will find men that are, and women that are involved, for good reasons. But I think that most people who are attracted to positions of government power, which is a kind of unaccountable, potentially unlimited, if you can just stay in office long enough, you're going to attract a certain kind of person that is just doing it for the power. So, but to about the system, I do want to add something else, because you mentioned that men's declining responsibility and what was the other thing? Was it authority as well?
I guess their authority, and then the respect that they earn from providing resources.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is that men are still providing resources. So that it doesn't matter if they're in a relationship or not, because men pay the net majority in income taxes and all the other kinds of taxes, their business taxes, their property taxes. They pay something like 80% of all of the taxes that go into social programs and military. That in the social programs basically ends up getting redistributed right to women who receive, and this is an interesting thing because they never bring this up. They talk about the wage gap, but they don't bring up the fact that when it comes to social programs, women are the net beneficiaries. 80% of all of the taxation, which men pay by and large into. And this is because, again, at the early ages, men and women are making about the same. Maybe women earn a little bit more. But later, most of the time, women, they quit their job to raise families and men continue to work. So over the long term, they end up paying more into it. So they're either paying money to women, whether they're dating them or not, even if they don't even know their name, or they're paying into the military, which is an institution that puts men into a meat grinder. So, and again, men they can be made aware of this and they'd be fine with it as long as what they're doing is like what they think is the right thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. That whole argument for paying women for unpaid labor at home, it just seems I understand the appeal to it. If you're a woman, you're like, yeah, of course I want to be paid for cleaning up and doing all this stuff. But basically you're just inserting this huge bureaucratic apparatus between a man and a woman, which is already wedged apart by the bureaucratic apparatus.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like I want to go back to liberty and security again, because I think that this is where my mind is right now. with these conversations. I've been doing this for a while, but what I've been thinking about a lot lately, aside from what masculinity is, what manhood is, because it's not simply a series of masculine and feminine traits, and it's not simply, obviously, the physical presence of being a man, like a biological male, but there is something narrative about being a man. And this is something that I think a lot of men want to, they connect with. This is why, again, Peterson is so popular, because he puts masculinity in an easy to understand and digest narrative framework that a lot of men not only relate to, but they're very attracted to. They're drawn to it.
I think women are attracted to it too.
I think so too. I think that there are women that have a masculine side that they're.
No, I also think that women are attracted to men who adopt
absolutely.
Peterson's thing.
Yes,
I think that's part of his appeal. So
yes, that's true. That's true. But the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is this concept of liberty and security. The way that the current system is set up, men pay to make women feel secure, whether they want to or not, through taxation. And it goes into various programs. And of course, most feminist activists are only asking for more of men's money when they want free, reproductive health care, if they want free maternity leave or paid maternity leave. They want all of these ways to essentially get more of men's resources directed to them. And they do this through the state. Now, of course, while that's happening, the state takes a cut, and at every level, all the red tape, they all get their cut. So even though men are paying into it, what women get on the other side is probably just a fraction of what was initially paid. Yeah. So under that model, men get the illusion of liberty, because we still live in the freest country in the world, at least one of the freest countries in the world, and so they feel relatively free, even if they have some complaints about how high taxes are or whatever. And women get an illusion of security because they're getting enough money to survive from the state, they get a home and maybe they get a cell phone or something like that, but they're not actually able to thrive, and they're not really safe because they are raising their children without a father, and they're putting their children at risk of a lot of factors, and they themselves can never rise out of that hole, if we're talking about the women who are getting the most from the system. What's ironic, or not, what's interesting about this is if you took that out and men and women could come together like in an organic and voluntary way to form a union and raise families, women and men would get both of the things they want. Women would get the security and the comfort and the stability that the man could provide without the state, right? If this is a bit of a pipe dream, but if you could, like, say, eliminate the welfare state completely, and it was just like men and women coming together, like in some smaller societies, developing nations, or maybe even hunter-gatherers or something, women would get the security and the stability directly from the men in their lives, and on top of that, they would get more because that man would be a father to her children and provide them with everything that they need on top of what she brings to the table. And at the same time, men would get that liberty insofar as they would be able to raise the children in the way that they see is best. Because if a man has children and you say you're a free man, you can do whatever you want, he's probably going to want to be with his children. But that's his choice. So yeah, I think that it would work out. And I think that's the interesting thing about it, is that if men and women came together, they would actually have what the other wants, right?
Given the proper social structure, which we probably arguably don't have right now.
No, I think that things are really eroded between men and women. So I think that that's what we need to work on. We need to repair and build the bridges between men and women again. And we need to help them without, we want to help them better understand their story, if that makes sense. Like the story, what is the story of man? What is the story of woman? Can we understand that? And we can do this without restricting anyone. This is why I was a little bit hesitant, because I don't want to say women have to act this way or men have to act this way.
Yeah. We will always have to make an exception for the exception, so they don't think we're trying to rule over them. Yeah.
Right. Although I believe that there have and this is just I believe there have always been exceptions, and most of the time they just did what they wanted. Like, you hear about Marie Curie all the time. Mm-hmm. And, I'm grateful for the work that Marie Curie did, but I don't think that anyone was stars. Yeah, I don't think that if there was men standing in her way and telling her she can't do that, it didn't appear to work. So I don't really see why this is an issue to talk about. Like, there have always been people who have basically said, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be the weirdo. And they may have had some pushback from people who were like, I don't like that. This is not the status quo, but it doesn't seem to matter because they went and did it anyway. And it's only because of people like that, like your Teslas and your Newton and your Marie Curie, or the woman who flew in the airplane. I don't remember her name.
Elon Musk?
No.
Amelia
Earhart. Yeah. But there have always been people like that. So, it's okay. I mean, that we've always made room for them in the past. I don't really think it's a big deal to ask or to talk about what is best for us in general, and also include and make room for people who are going to just do what they want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, since this is your interview, do you have any questions for me? Before we kind of wrap it up, we're almost.
Yeah. I want to go to the. That's fine. Okay, so I want to see if I got through all the things that I wanted to say. Do you?
Good stuff, though.
Well, thank you. I hope that I gave you some things to think about.
I feel exposed.
No, it's all right. Do you believe that? Does it make you uncomfortable to talk about men's issues because I'm just wondering, because when I talk to people about men's issues, they always feel like they need to start by saying something like, oh, well, before we start, I don't hate women or anything, like, is it do you think that it's possible that we can talk about men's issues without having to stop every 5 minutes to say, look, this isn't against women?
Yeah.
Or feminism, for that matter.
Yeah, I think that I am on my way to, and part of the reason we're even speaking is because I don't know exactly what happened, but I said something to the fact that I wasn't necessarily interested in covering men's issues, because I have been treating, for over two and a half years now, I've been doing a series on gender, sexuality, and transition. And there's kind of this big gap of men's issues. I haven't really covered it, right? I kind of have, but I haven't, because I have always been kind of perturbed or put off by feminism. And so I've gone on this really kind of I think, rather robust excursion into feminism, and met a lot of people and learned a lot of different things about a lot of the different nuances within all the different types of feminism that's going on. And to some degree, it's been consistently brought up, why don't I talk to men? Why don't I talk about men? Why don't I cover these issues? And I have before, but I was kind of in a position, well, I'm kind of a man. I think it would be much more interesting, kind of like the Honey Badger Radio ladies. Like, it's actually, it might be more interesting for them to talk about men than it is for them to talk about women. Maybe, I don't know. But for me, it's kind of more interesting to talk about women, or to talk to women about women, and to investigate women's issues from that side, and to get a range of conservative to liberal to radical to libertarian views, to even I haven't had a trad on yet. I need to get a trad woman on.
A trad woman?
A trad woman. Trad femme? What are they called? Trad cons?
I don't know. The trad cons, traditionalist conservatives.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, anyways, I haven't gone there, so there's a lot of mapping out. Anyways, long and the short of it is, I think that there is a stigma around men's rights activism being either MGTOW, incel, or there's something, I really apologize to your audience, there's something that seemed kind of a little pathetic about me complaining about being a man.
Yeah,
I just
that's the paradox.
Yeah.
You're pointing out the paradox because men. So femininity is best described. A lot of people talk about what it is, but femininity and masculinity are probably best described as femininity is your ability to recognize how you are affected by the world, how you are impacted by things. And masculinity is recognizing the ways in which you impact things. Now, this doesn't mean that only men have a feminine side, women have a masculine side, right? But in general, women tend to evaluate or see their world as how they are affected by it.
Over the long term as well, too.
Yes,
like having a sense of
if they're invested in the future, like if they have children, they look further out, right? If they don't, then they might be a little bit more immediate. And men are concerned with how they affect the world. So in general, but they both share these traits. So like when you talk to a man about men's issues, you're trying to tell them this is how you are affected by the world. And men tend to be repulsed by that because when you tell them they're affected by something, they sort of see it as something they can't do anything about. And men don't like the idea that there are things happening to them that they can't control or that they can't prevent. And so they tend to find it weak, right? And pathetic, like you said. So it's hard because you're trying to sell, not victimhood, I don't like that word, but you're trying to sell the ways in which men can be made vulnerable to men who don't want to see it because it's painful for them. And it's sort of like trying to do the opposite for women, to say, look, ladies, these are the ways in which your actions impact the greater world. These are the ways that you harm, the people around you or whatever. It's not just about you. They will become upset by that because it's not all of them, obviously, but I think in general, this is the way men and women respond to this. So if you look at masculinity as, how my actions impact everything, and I tell you, you're being impacted by something right now, and it's not your doing, then you're going to say, well, I don't like that because then I can't change it, So think about it another way. Have you ever seen the really funny, I think it was like an ad, and there was a woman with a nail in her forehead?
Yeah, I was just watching it the other day.
Okay, yeah. And she's like, it's not about the nail. Well, the man wants to just fix it. That's the way men are. They just want to fix problems. So if you tell them they're experiencing a problem, but that the solution is not within their reach alone, that they have to advocate, they have to talk to people and all of that, they're going to find it a little bit repulsive.
Yeah. I think that most of my work with regards to men's issues or to masculinity is done implicitly by the way that I behave, the way that I treat other people, the way that I try to regulate my humor and my flirtation, my curiosity, and my intelligence to make a good kind of well-rounded image of a man. I think it's very implicit to do a series, this is a part of a sub-series of a series on gender, to explore masculinity. It took me a while to say, well, how do I confront that head on? And it was great to talk with you. You're very reasonable. You put it out there. It wasn't pathetic at all. You're not pitiable. And you didn't paint a pitiable picture. You outlined some very definite requirements, needs, and factors that are going on right now. Well, painting men as victims won't work. It not only is it not effective on men, it's not effective on women either. Doing it for women is a lot more effective because we love women. We care about them. We want them to be comfortable. So if we tell the world women are suffering, everyone stands up. What can I do? But if we tell the world men are suffering, it doesn't work as well. And men don't want to hear it either. But what we can do is we can talk about boys. Because that's what I try to do. I think that starting with men is also starting in the middle anyway. We have to start with boys. Okay. Yeah, you start with the circumcision. I guess that's your entry point. That's where you start your play. Yeah,
right at the beginning. I mean, yeah, you can even go before that in a way. Like when a woman discovers she's pregnant, the rights of the father are basically non-existent. Like whether or not she decides to have the child or have an abortion, it's at her discretion all the way to birth. But I mean, you could start there too, but I think that people tend to be more responsive when you talk about infant boys and young boys. Mm-hmm.
So what's going forward from now? What do you guys have lined up? Just pretending that we're on my channel now, what can we plug for you guys? What do you have something awesome coming down the pipes?
On my channel, Badger Live Streams is where I do most of the content. It's live. We basically have like an ongoing series of shows where we talk about the news of the day, and we try to relate it to gender because, you know, when I was talking to you about the death of DMX and George Floyd, I'm trying to say, you know, here's what the left says about the George Floyd situation. Here's what the right says about the George Floyd situation. Here's our angle on the George Floyd situation. You don't want any George Floyds? Then we have to go all the way to way before we knew his name, when he was a child, maybe even when he was in his mother's womb, to talk about what that boy needed so that he would not end up in this situation today. And we talk. We have a regular news show every Tuesday. It's called HBR News. We also have several talks. I think that your audience, if they want to hear the ladies, they might be interested in checking out HBR Talk, which is every Thursday at 7, where they will discuss, they'll dig deep into a topic. It could be circumcision, it could be dating, it could be, feminism, or the tactics that are typically employed, and how we differentiate ourselves, you know. And I also have a series that I'm doing on Fridays, every other Friday. It's called Brian's Badger Lodge, and it's basically I let men call in, and it's a show for men exclusively so that men can talk to each other. Because one of the things that I think is vitally important, as much as it is, you know, great stuff for us to talk about, these issues and the importance of them, I also think what I think is really important, and I've seen this happening a lot lately, is male fraternity needs to come back. So what we need is men to get together with other men, because one of the other things that, you know, I talk about how feminism and Me Too and stuff has sort of divided men and women and created a lot of distrust and fear and anxiety between them, because of course women fear men are going to rape them, and men fear that women are going to accuse them and make them lose their jobs and their livelihoods. So this means that they don't want to be around each other, which creates a more hostile work environment. But it not only does that, it also creates a hostile environment between men and men, because most men love women. So if they hear that there are men who are predatory and abusive and rapey, then those men are ready to be violent to the men that they suspect are the bad men. So you basically create a different level of tension. And neither of those men need to be feminists per se, because men in general want to protect women. And so we need to bring men together. And I think that fraternity between men is what has to happen. So that's why I do the Badger Lodge every other week. Are
you willing to divulge the hazing rituals that you enact upon your male audience and your lodge? Or is that kind of, you have to be a part of the club to get in?
Yeah. If you don't want to, for the top,
some light ball busting, maybe.
Yeah, the towel spankings, you know, the wet towel slaps. We do that before the show, so nobody has to see it.
Yeah.
But if you want to call in, you got to do that first. No, but yeah, I think that stuff is. Like I said, male fraternity is very important. And I have noticed that it's a growing trend. There's a lot of other men's groups that are doing this kind of thing. And I think it's a good thing. So we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat. Thank you so much for making the time to come on my channel and for me to come on yours. You're welcome.
Hopefully this is the first of few. Yeah. I can get more of your honey badgers. Could you at least tell me what a honey badger is in this context?
Yeah, so it's
an Or should I wait for one of the women?
No. It's okay. It's an old joke. So basically, before I got involved, there's a female therapist named Tara Palmatier. She's really great. She works with men. She helps them if they've been victims of abuse, whether it's domestic violence or psychological abuse, emotional abuse, etc. And she met with Allison Tiemann, who runs HBR. At the time, they didn't have a name for this, right? They were just female men's rights activists. Allison Tiemann, Karen Strawn, who I know that you've had on your channel before. And
she had me on hers.
Yeah, or she had you on hers. And Hannah Wallen, they were the originators, right? And I guess Tara Palmatier made a joke about them because there are these three women that are quite disagreeable online. We get into lots of arguments with feminists and stuff. And Tara Palmatier called them honey badgers because the honey badger is this, it's based on that video, that viral video of the honey badger with the really effeminate guy narrating, and he says, "Honey badger don't give a shit. Look at him." He's, and it was this really funny viral video about a honey badger that, is allowing itself to get stung by bees, and it's, just sort of powering through. So it's this small, super tenacious animal, and that's where the meme comes from. So the honey badgers specifically refer to all the women on the channel. I'm just the dog that runs.
It sounds kind of like a sex position. So I just thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah, well, look it up on Urban Dictionary. It probably is. Anyway,
all right, Brian.
So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Chet. Absolutely.
And I'll talk to you in the next video. We'll have maybe you'll meet with Hannah next week, and I'll set that up. All right.
Yeah, we'll set that up.
All right. Talk to you later.
See you guys.
Okay.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.